Good afternoon. It's Friday the 17th of May 2024, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Mike Robinson. Joining me today, we have Ben Rubin, Debi Evans and Cheryl Grainger. So welcome to the programme all. We've got lots to get through today. We're going to get started with the incident with Robert Fico on Wednesday. This was happening just as we were in the middle of Extra. And we saw some of the headlines coming in. It was being discussed in the chat box and so on. But I wanted to look at what's behind this because, first of all, bringing on the Interior Minister from Slovakia, he was suggesting that Slovakia is on the verge of civil war. The gunman shot 5 times. The first information we have is that it was a politically motivated act. But the question in my mind is it politically motivated in the sense of local politics, or is there something else going on? Now, before we answer that question, let's just have a look at some of the mainstream media coverage from the UK. Really, the message from mainstream media in the UK has been, well, he was a friend of Russia, so, why worry about it? So the Telegraph here, how Robert Fico's turned Slovakia into one of Russia's only allies. The country's prime minister is reportedly in a life-threatening condition after assassination attempt. The Financial Times had a similar take on it, but they were sort of harking back to this article from a month or so ago. No, I think this was, April 2024. Pro-Russia candidate Peter Pellegrini elected Slovakia president. So the message is that Slovakia has become a pro-Russia country. This was the Guardian yesterday. He's borrowing from Trump, the rise of Robert Fico, Slovakia's populist leader. So we're getting the message very strongly here that he was a Trump-like figure and therefore not flavour of the month with the West. And indeed, here's Foreign Policy magazine. Russia just helped swing a European election. So the presidential election in Slovakia is being blamed on Russia, the result of that, because the West doesn't like it, and therefore Russian disinformation was what it was all about. Slovakia is swamped by disinformation ahead of parliamentary elections, said France 24 back in September last year. At the Atlantic Council in April this year, Slovakia's presidential choice reinforces its anti-Western leanings. And here is SIPA. Slovak vote shows need for NATO action on Russian disinformation. So the question is, what kind of action was taken on the issue of Russian disinformation? Well, the famous Ukrainian organization, the Center for Countering Disinformation, decided to put Robert Fico on their hit list. Now, the hit list on this website has been taken down now, but it's still available on the Wayback Machine if you want to go and have a look at all the names that they had on this list. It is effectively a kill list. It was a kill list. And it seems, well, I'm going to suggest that perhaps this isn't all about domestic politics. Looking at the Telegraph here from September last year, we won't send another bullet to Kiev, says Slovakia's Prime Minister front runner. So Robert Fico made it absolutely clear from September last year that he was not supporting the Ukrainian war, had no intention of supporting the Ukrainian war. And since he's been Prime Minister, he has not been supporting the Ukrainian war. But here's Politico. Slovak PM sends EU NATO members weighing sending troops to Ukraine. Says EU NATO members weighing sending troops to Ukraine. So the fact that France was intending to send, or was contemplating sending troops to Ukraine for boots on the ground was exposed by Robert Fico. So is it a coincidence then that within a few weeks he's been shot? I don't know. I just make the point that, of course, Slovakia, like most countries, is on the receiving end of the NGO CSO complex. So just one example, Open Society Foundation in Slovakia. So therefore, there is a big attempt from the West to make sure that the Western narratives portrayed in the media and in politics in Slovakia, it hasn't gone the West's way. And perhaps this is an example of that. So I'm going to leave that there. I'm just going to end this segment with a short piece of video. You may have seen this, but this took place in the European Parliament a couple of weeks ago.
What I'd like to say is that this is my last intervention in the Parliament. I would like to wish the whole of Europe, the whole of the world, the Russians and the Ukrainians, I wish everybody peace. And if I may, I would like to set free this bird as a symbol of peace. to symbolize that Europe needs peace. Let's let this dove fly above all of Europe. Let's let this dove unite all of us. Let this dove, a symbol of peace, us realize that what we need most is really peace.
So Slovakian politicians in the European Parliament and at home calling for peace, absolutely calling for peace, refusing to arm the Ukrainian conflict, the Ukrainian side, and exposing the fact that the West is considering putting boots on the ground in Ukraine. So again, I'm just going to say, to finish off, I question whether this was a domestic political thing. But Ben, I don't really want to hijack you here, but one of the things that struck me about this whole thing in the last couple of days is the narrative that MPs are therefore not safe. This is something that we've heard in the UK, but when we and in mainland Europe as well. But when we look at how many MPs have actually been on the receiving end of this activity, it does seem a bit strange that we've got MPs have got to be told they've got to be scared of their electorates. Do you think MPs should be scared of their electorates from a physical standpoint?
I don't think that we should live in a world where they should fear for their safety out on the street. But the idea that they should be immune from scrutiny or justice is absurd. And achieving a balance between those two things is absolutely crucial.
Yes, indeed it is. So now let's move on from this then and welcome Debi to the programme. And Debi, we've been a lot of news over the last couple of weeks with respect to AstraZeneca and therefore connections to Oxford University. But what have you got for us on this?
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. And thank you especially to Sam and Kenny who helped me put this segment together, because last week we focused in on Dame Kate Bingham. I'm sure you'll remember. Well, today it's the turn of Dame Sarah Gilbert. But before I introduce Dame Sarah Gilbert and our good friend Cheryl Grainger, who's a pharmaceutical training consultant, I want to set the scene, but I want to set it quite quickly for you so you can see where we're going with this. And if you know somebody that's had an AstraZeneca injection, or indeed you have, I think you'll find this section very interesting. So let's start off with vaccinology, because vaccinology is the next big thing. If you're a doctor or if you've majored in something like immunology, you can become a vaccinologist. And the reason why this is important will become clear in a minute, because according to The Guardian just recently, we know that AstraZeneca has been withdrawn, but they seem to give us the impression that its remarkable success must never be forgotten. Really? Well, it goes on to say that it's so remarkable that actually it saved 6.3 million lives in 2021 alone. Really? I don't know where the evidence for that is. Now, back in April 2020, Oxford announced a partnership with AstraZeneca to upscale their recipe. So what you have to bear in mind here is that Oxford were cooking up the recipe in their chemical kitchen, and then AstraZeneca agreed to upscale it, took the license on to deliver it to everybody's arms. So just want you to, if you just slip back to that slide for 2 seconds, I want you just to take note of the bit there where I've said Oxford University and its spin-out company, Vaccitech. All of that will become clear in a minute. So let's have a look at Oxford. Who is responsible? Who is Oxford? So the Oxford vaccine is a team. So we've got Dame Sarah Gilbert, Professor Andrew Pollard, Professor Theresa Lamb, Dr. Sandy Douglas, Professor Catherine Green, and Professor Adrian Hill. Now, they've been busy developing vaccines for this disease X. So let's go and look at very quickly who this Oxford team is. So Professor Adrian Hill, Jenna, Oxford, Professor of Vaccinology. Then we have Professor Andrew Pollard. He's actually a Professor of Science and Immunity, but with paediatric interests as well. Then Dr. Sandy Douglas, he's into large-scale manufacturing. He was actually responsible for the 2 billion doses, getting them in arms, and he's tied up to the Wellcome Institute as well. Then we've got Theresa Lamb, head of vaccine immunology, vaccinologist. And then we've got Professor Kath Green at the Nuffield and Wellcome Genetics. And of course, let's not forget Professor John Bell, who's just been awarded a Companion of Honour, he was the Regius Professor at Oxford. And then finally, we have Professor Dame Sarah Gilbert, who is the lead vaccinologist in Oxford. Now, I want to bring your attention to a company called Barinthus Biotherapeutics. Now, this is a spin-off from the Jenner and Oxford Institutes, and they deal very much in cancer and infectious diseases. Let's have a look at the investors of Barinthus Biotherapeutics. Well, we have Cancer Research UK, we've got Oxford, of course, we've got the Ludwig Cancer Research. But when we go to look at the team for Barinthus, we can see Sarah Gilbert and Adrian Hill, the co-founders of this very company. So I went to Companies House and I looked them up, Barinthus Biotherapeutics, and they were originally Vaccitech. Well, Vaccitech, of course, were the company we just mentioned, the spin-off from Oxford. So let's go a little bit further and have a look at the directors, because we can see that Professor Adrian Hill and Dame Sarah Gilbert both were directors but have resigned. And Dame Sarah Gilbert, she's a very important person. She absolutely loved it when she had a Barbie doll made of her, because this is to promote vaccinology and to try to get youngsters to become vaccinologists. So Dame Sarah Gilbert did a lovely lecture, the Richard Dimbleby lecture, the 44th of Richard Dimbleby lecture, December 2021. Sometimes, words come back to haunt you. Let's have a listen to what some of the things that she said at the lecture.
Usually, we would not start work on the design of a clinical trial until we had completed all the animal trials. That way, if the animals trials showed the vaccine was not safe or not effective, we would not have wasted time preparing clinical trials that could not go ahead. This time, we did all the clinical trial preparation while the animal trials were still going on. That way, it was within days of receiving the safety data from our animal trials that we were putting the first vaccine into the arms of our first volunteers.
And then she went on to say this.
We have also not done well in communicating about the safety and benefits of vaccinating pregnant women. A year ago, when vaccines were first being rolled out, vaccinating pregnant women was not universally recommended. This is the usual approach with new drugs or vaccines. We wait for special studies in animals, vaccinating before or just after conception, and then waiting for the offspring to be born. Then we do a study in pregnant women, and only then is the vaccine recommended for use in pregnant women generally. A year on, it is clear not only that the COVID vaccine is safe for pregnant women and their babies, but also that unvaccinated pregnant women and their babies are at high risk if they become infected with COVID. This information has been slow to reach pregnant women and even some midwives and vaccination centres. Although by April 2021, it was being recommended that they be included in the vaccination rollout in the UK, by the end of October, only 15% of pregnant women had received 2 vaccinations. In hindsight, pregnant women should perhaps have been identified as a priority group for vaccination starting from April. If we had highlighted the benefits rather than only seeking to remove concerns about the risks, we could have avoided some very poor outcomes for pregnant women and their babies. There were also completely unfounded scare stories that vaccines would affect fertility. To be clear, data from vaccine trials and fertility clinics has demonstrated that there is no basis in fact for this claim. But communicating this to people who do not receive that information from mainstream media is a problem we have not yet solved.
Perhaps mainstream media was the problem. And before I bring Cheryl in to comment on what she's just said, I just want to highlight that these 3 dames, Dame Professor Sarah Gilbert, made the AstraZeneca solution. Dame Kate Bingham, she distributed it, she procured it, and Dame June Rain approved it. And on that note, I'm really very grateful to Cheryl, who's got a lot more information on what Dame Sarah Gilbert just said. Cheryl, welcome to UK Column. Thank you so much. And go right ahead. The floor is yours.
Thanks, Debbie. Hello, everybody. Yes, three snippets of video that I just want to comment on. Kate Bingham provided the means to fund global clinical trials. And what you've got to think about is what was known at that time during 2020. So the infection fatality rate was 0.096%. It was listed in Hansard, and the average age of death was 82.5. The virus had been downgraded from a highly infectious disease by the 19th of March before we went into lockdown. And basically, this virus was behaving very differently to any other virus that had ever been known because, for example, in the States, it behaved differently in bordering states. So there are lots of things that we knew about, but in the meantime, fear was being raised to demand a rush to vaccine development and obviously generate a demand. And the lies were being pushed that this vaccine was the only thing that could help in the pandemic. So we were all generating a demand that we needed this vaccine. So we got a venture capitalist to provide funds. They weren't concerned about whether it's a safe and effective treatment. The vaccinologist, with a narrow vision of producing a vaccine at all costs, but they wanted to be the successful vaccine and they wanted to be the first. And that was the bit about the speed. We needed this as soon as possible. And then obviously the clinical trials, they usually follow an application to the MHRA, and then they're reviewed by medical, scientific and ethical experts. And then they follow the Declaration of Helsinki, which shows that participants' well-being should take precedence over scientific knowledge. So all that is a background to what she's been saying. And this rush bit from animal trials being held concurrently with the clinical trials is something that's never been done before. So the reason being, it takes about £1 billion to develop a drug. Obviously, they have to get the funding for that. And if they do an animal study and they find out that it's not successful, then that can stop anything being developed further. But in this case, they had the funding and there was no liability, and they did the animal trials, and the clinical trials were being run at the same time. And on top of that, they were manufacturing. They were manufacturing at the same time as they were doing all this. And the MHRA, of course, was doing a rolling review of the data. As it came in, they were reviewing it. So nothing was done in a way that had been done before. So the animal trial should be a bridge between the laboratory work and the patient. It's under strict legislative control, and it should give you confidence that you're not putting your people at risk that are going to be in the clinical trial. And it operates under this good laboratory framework that they should have been adhering to. So let's look at what happened in the animal trials. So Dr. Vanessa Kruger-Schmidt had analysed, very good analysis, of the European medical agencies, what's called open assessment reports from the 29th of January 2021. So this is evidence from AstraZeneca that she looked at. And in particular, on the animal trial data, she basically said they'd looked at mice, ferrets, rhesus monkeys and pigs. And the conclusions were that there was none or only a very slight protective effect seen from the vaccination, immunological responses, antibodies and cytokine release. They basically were not present, or there were only partial differences. The T-cell response after vaccination was limited or absent. Studies basically showed that there was no protective effect against this, which is the basis of the license. AZ vaccine was supposed to protect against the infection. Sorry, Debbie.
I just want to round up very quickly, Cheryl, because I know we're going to be talking about more of this, in particular the pregnancy data as well in Extra. But in your opinion, was Dame Sarah Gilbert lying?
She's lied all the way through because she covered up the fact that the animal data showed that it wasn't effective. And why would you go any further with it? And then when we get onto the pregnancy comments that she made, she didn't have the evidence to back up what she was saying, unless she was aware of the yellow card vaccine monitor, because that showed that there were problems. There were a lot of side effects that were being witnessed by the 1,300 and odd pregnant women that were in the trial. So she wasn't being truthful when she was actually making those comments. And that was at the end of December 2021. We knew by the February that there'd already been 205 deaths with AstraZeneca. None of that was mentioned.
Cheryl, thank you so much for that. Please tune in for Extra because there's much more to come on this. Thank you, Cheryl.
Thank you, Debbie and Cheryl. So Cheryl will be joining us in Extra, so that's going to be great. Now, Ben, let's come over to you. Well, what are we talking about? Mr. Pullman.
Exactly that, yes. We're going to talk about one of the most connected, powerful and influential men on the entire planet, a man you've probably never heard of, but who is working day and night behind the scenes to radically reshape British society, especially our food system. Who is it? It's this fella, Paulus Gerardus Josephus Maria Pullman, KBE. I'm going to call him Paul Pullman, or maybe even just Pullman for the sake of brevity in the broadcast. Who is he? If we have a look at his LinkedIn profile, he tells us that he was nearly a priest. And I'm going to wager that that was in the Catholic Church, and I'll let you interpret what I mean by that. He's an international business leader. If we could just click on one, we can see that he spent 40 years in the food industry, rising to the very top levels. He spent 27 of those years at Procter & Gamble, rising to Group President of Europe. He then spent 3 years at Nestle as CFO and President of Americas before taking the top job at Unilever, where he spent a decade delivering purpose-driven change. This guy has really defined the business landscape over the past 10 or 15 years. He made a big shout in his Unilever tenure about decoupling economic growth from environmental impact, and he's really been at the forefront of driving the climate and sustainability narrative. And he now spends his time going around the world lecturing humanity on how to live. Let's have a little listen to what he has to say.
The two biggest challenges that need to be addressed are climate change and inequality. And frankly, they're closely related. We see that we're at the point where the cost of inaction is actually higher than the cost of action, to the point that we're starting to ask ourselves the question, what the heck are we doing? And we're sleeping on the wheel. Although we're driving, we're clearly not driving fast enough. We're heading for 3.5, 4 degrees, and we're sitting here as if nothing happens. We're far behind on the global goals as well. Now, we might all be fine, but there will be a hell of a lot more people dying. There will be a heck of a lot more poverty in this world. I don't want to be responsible for that. Anytime you know that you're polluting and put carbon in the air, there's someone else going to die. Anytime you know you're wasting food, there's someone else going to die. It is our problem. We're living on that same planet. And if we don't find a way to live in harmony with our fellow citizens, it's not going to work. We don't need more PhDs. We don't need more people to go to Pluto or Mars to find the answer. What we need is human willpower. And the simple question to ask ourselves is, do we really care? Ladies and gentlemen, we belong to the 2% of the world population that has won the lottery ticket of life. And that brings us to goal number 17 of the SDGs, a goal that is called partnership. It's a partnership for humanity. It's a partnership for the common good. It's a partnership where we put the interest of others ahead of our own. In the course of history, there comes a time when humanity is called upon to shift to a new level of consciousness. It clearly is the moment to do this. You're actually doing something for generations to come. You're a real leader. You're a real leader by simply bringing humanity back to business. My simple request to you is live a life with purpose. Thank you very much.
What a rousing speech, Ben. I love the music.
Yeah, quite. Do you know what? I'm actually going to jack it all in and buy myself an SDG pin and go and hang around with Paul Pullman and do whatever he wants. I was almost in tears there. And that's essentially what he's spending his time doing, right? So he spent 40 years in business, but he's now a vocal proponent of the SDGs, and he does that in a formal capacity, right? So this is one of the, as I said at the start, one of the best connected people on earth. Like, this is a completely crazy number of roles that he currently holds, right? He's got 20 different concurrent positions listed on his LinkedIn profile, and these are just the ones that he talks about publicly. So I'm just going to whip through these very quickly, but I'll skim over some of them, but they're really fascinating when you look into the totality of this and what he sits at the center of, right? So he's an author. He has a book called Net Positive. This is his big thought leadership platform. He's also an advocate emeritus of the SDGs. It's a formal position at the UN. He's also vice chair of the UN Global Compact, which describes itself as the world's largest corporate sustainability initiative. He's a board member of Systemic, which is a consulting and technology business focused on systemic change across all industries. He was also a founding investor in their private equity fund. I'm going to talk about them in another show. They're a fascinating organization. He's also a board member of the Rockefeller Foundation. If we can click on one, we can see that he is also chair of Oxford Said Business School. So that aligns up quite neatly with what Debi and Cheryl were just talking about. Oxford is right at the centre of a lot of this stuff. He is a member of the Director General's Business Advisory Group at the World Trade Organization. He is the chair of the Global Advisory Board at One Young World, which is a youth charity whose patron is Meghan Markle. And there is also a partner with My Life, My Say, who we've spoken about a lot previously. We can flick on one more. We can see that he is the co-chair of the Food and Land Use Coalition, a global advisor to SMBC Group, which is a big Japanese bank, a member of the Global Advisory Board of Temasek, which is a Singapore state-owned conglomerate, leader of something called the B Team, which we're going to talk about separately. Fascinating group that he's part of there. He actually helped found it, was the chair. He's a friend of COP26, so he's all about climate action. And he is the co-founder and chair emeritus of something called Imagine, which I'll come back to in a minute. But before I do, Mike, you've thrown something at me. I'm going to throw something back at you. 20 concurrent roles. Like, what do you make of all of that?
Well, he's clearly a very, very special person and a global leader. I mean, it is not possible for anybody to actually take an active role in 20 different roles like that. So these are, but on the other hand, he's clearly right at the center of a network, and so the question is, what is that network up to?
Yeah, quite exactly. I'd imagine he's got an army of helpers running around him the whole time. And here we're going to talk about a bunch of them now. I'm going to run through a little bit about this organisation, Imagine, which was the last one on the list, last but not least. So what is it? So it's a group of disruptors and change makers. They were sung into existence in 2019 at the MoMA by a collective of space transformers. Right, so they was sung into existence at moments. This kind of ceremonial creation of this entity. Now, on Monday, Mark was talking about Bilderberg, and Marie Jose Kravis, who is the wife of I can't remember his first name, Kravis from KKR, the private equity gurus. She's the chair of the Museum of Modern Art. So she's the co-chair of the Bilderberg meeting. She's the chair of the Museum of Modern Art. I think there might well be a connection there between this organisation, Imagine, and the Bilderberg meetings, which we'll talk about that when they come up again in a couple of weeks. They're also very closely linked to the World Economic Forum, especially the Young Global Leader Programme. Right, so this is the core team at Imagine. You have Valerie Keller, who was a former executive director of global markets at EY, who I talked about last week, Jan Janowski, who is a private equity guy, Sylvia Weissner, who's big in top level executive recruitment. They were all young global leaders, right? So that's nearly half of the team, the young global leaders. And finally, David Eichmann, who's the guy in the cowboy hat, who actually worked at the World Economic Forum, and he ran the Young Global Leaders Program and the Global Shapers Community and the Technology Pioneers Program and the Schwab Foundation for Social Entrepreneurship at the World Economic Forum, right? So this organization is absolutely in the center of the WEF, as well as all the other organizations that we've talked about. So what are they up to? So it's all for good, of course, right? So they did this thing called the Fashion Pact, which they launched with Emmanuel Macron, which brought together 60 different organizations from across the fashion industry. They also have this thing called the Food Collective, which is about convening stakeholders from food and agriculture to drive dialogue, ambition, and collective action, right? And how does that manifest? Well, it manifests at a national level in this organization, which came to my attention a couple of weeks ago. It's been going for about 2 years now. It's called the Food, Farming and Countryside Commission, but they've just sparked into life, become much more active, and started issuing public statements. In particular, this thing called the Hope Farm Statement, which was issued by Paul Polman and a group of people from across the private and public sectors, civil society, all that kind of thing. They say, together, we're calling for the next UK government as a matter of urgent national priority, starting in its first 100 days, to implement a bold national food and farming strategy for the UK, drawing on the wealth of evidence available, including the National Food Strategy, which I'll come back to. They have 6 core recommendations: legally binding targets and policy coherence, increased public as well as private sector funding to support farmers, robust public procurement standards with tighter regulation, multifunctional land use framework, fair and consistent standards, and then also, importantly, measurement and disclosure frameworks for accountability. So they actually want to control what's going on across the whole farming sector. You should go and read the statement. It's not particularly long, but it will give you a good idea of what these people are up to. One of the signatories, and there are a bunch of them, all listed in the statement. You can go and read it yourself. But one of them was Henry Dimbleby, another name which has come up again. That came up earlier, so we'll talk about that in extra. So he was the former UK food czar. He actually wrote the National Food Strategy. He was in the Times saying that the Hope Statement represents a fundamental quantum shift, a step change in the public discourse. He's personally, financially invested in this space. He actually launched a private equity fund to transform the global system. And when he wrote the National Food Strategy in 2021, he did that alongside Bain, the global consulting firm, who talked about our food sector as a series of interconnected industrial processes. And one of the main things they were keen to reinforce was the idea that in farming, we need consolidation so that we have fewer big corporate players who are able to negotiate more effectively with the other participants in the industry, right? So this is all about commercialization, corporatization, big food, big money, all being distributed from the top level down by people like Paulus Gerardus, Josephus Maria Polman, and the organizations that he represents.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you for that. Really interesting. Okay, now if you like what the UK column does, you would like to support us, you can do. It's only £5 a month. Please do support us at support.ukcolumn.org if you possibly can. We do need your help. You could share anything we find on the various platforms. And as we mentioned the other day, we are no longer apparently allowed to use Facebook because we've been locked out of Facebook. Vanessa Beeley told me after the news on Wednesday that the same thing has happened to her as well. So basically the page is still up, but we're no longer able to log into Facebook and add new content. So that is the way they seem to be dealing with us at the moment. But if you want to pick up something up at the UK Column shop to support us, that is another option as well. There are many items there. If you'd like to do that, that'd be much appreciated. Now, the second episode, or the second part of the interview that Alex did with Yuri Roska, is on the website now. If you'd like to, if you didn't see it yesterday at 1 p.m, do have a look at that. On Brian's YouTube channel at 11 a.m. on Sunday, he will be premiering the 4th episode of Walking the Dog. Join him for that if you possibly can. Well, the details of that will be in the show notes if you're not sure how to find that. On Sunday, then in the evening, we will be hosting. Now that the times on screen there are US times, so we'll be hosting a symposium called "From National Security to Biosecurity: Global Power Dynamics and the Erosion of Freedom in the 21st Century." Meryl Nass, Matt Vassetti will be speaking, Niels Harrod and Dr. Pierce Robinson as well. So that begins at 6 p.m. UK time. Join us for that on Sunday. And then at 1 p.m. on Thursday, the 30th of May, we'll be hosting a symposium entitled "The mRNA Vaccine Disaster and Its Implications," and calling for a full stop of any further rollout of mRNA vaccination. So that's on Thursday, the 30th of May at 1 p.m. in the normal 1 p.m. slot. Debi, let's come back to you then. And what's the latest from the NHS?
Oh, well, I'm going to whiz round a few stories on this segment because there's just so much craziness going on. So, yeah, let's start off with the NHS. So, I'm afraid now only half, well, we say only half, of England's care home residents have had the spring COVID jab. So, they're saying over 155,000 have received the potentially life-saving. I would question that. So, yes, spring boosters and a rise of COVID in inverted commas. Now, have you been getting text messages? Are you fed up with getting text messages? Well, if you've got the NHS app, which I hope you haven't, but if you've got the NHS app, you're now going to get texts on your NHS app, and it's going to save the NHS 1.1 million. We've already got 34 million registered users. If you've got the NHS app, I strongly suggest you remove it. So going on to something completely different now, TAVIs. What's a TAVI? Well, a TAVI is a transcatheter aortic valve implantation. It's to replace a valve or to knock a valve to one side to replace it with a new valve in the heart. It's a very risky procedure and needs to be carried out by a very experienced cardiac surgeon, which is why when it was carried out by an advanced nurse practitioner, people were shocked. In the next slide, in this slide, you can see there he is. That's John Steele. He was the nurse that was performing this TAVI, and I'm afraid it got the thumbs down from pretty much everybody. You can see there that it was deemed unsafe. But what's going on today? Because that was back in 2023. But today, I was alarmed to see a report from the BBC. Non-surgeons are removing gallbladders. Yes, they really are. The article from the BBC goes on to say that this has been going on at Walsall Manor Hospital, and 175 procedures over the last 4 years have been carried out by surgical care practitioners. Well, who are surgical care practitioners? Because if anything goes wrong, they're not covered. So the Royal College of Surgeons have come out again, and in particular at the Royal London Hospital, Professor Shafi Ahmed has said a laparoscopic cholecystectomy is a major operation with significant major potential complications, including mortality. This is unsafe and dangerous and needs to be stopped immediately. So what is a surgical care practitioner? Well, there's a lot more to be said about this, but just briefly, a surgical care practitioner is a registered non-medical healthcare professional. They work as members of the surgical team. So my question is, who is doing your surgery? Do you know? Have you asked? Then we've got the new injection that's coming out, this revolutionary Quartet Nano Cage. So this is the new solution that is being prepared for viruses, in inverted commas, that are yet to emerge. This is the article in SciTech Daily. If you go on one more slide, you'll see that the Quartet Nano Cage, and I'm not an expert in these things, but it doesn't look good to me. It talks about a ball of proteins and antigens being stuck together with a protein superglue. I don't think that's going to end well. And then on to a completely different subject. We'll go straight on to DWP next. I did tell you this was going to be a whiz around because there are so many ridiculously crazy stories. So according to Benefit and Works, DWP are going to have powers of arrest, seizure, and they're going to be able to collect information. Because of a public survey, which I'll show you in a moment, it's proposed that there are trained DWP investigators with arrest powers who can search and seize. They can collect information from claimants to see what they're spending money on. They can also collect banking information. Banks can share information, and government organisations can also share data with the DWP. Here's the survey if you'd like to go and have a look at it. You can see it on the DWP website. But Wales Online were actually backing all of this up, and they were reporting that they're looking at a 2,500 team to check universal credit. And we're talking about DWP making arrests and raiding houses. And it's absolutely shocking. I can't believe that this is going to be happening. And they're going to be imposing civil penalties, this new civil penalties. And I just want to end this segment. I couldn't not without mentioning the APPG maternity services statement, which has come out and shown that the maternity services are literally, it's shocking. 1,300 submissions, including mums that had gone through stillbirth, cerebral palsy, paralysis, mistakes being made, failures, lack of compassion, mums lying in blood-soaked sheets, and women, basically, the conclusion was women were treated as an inconvenience. There's so much more to be said on all of these stories, but I just wanted to pack in as much as I could, as quickly as I could.
Thank you, Debbie. Thank you. Now, let's move on then to the latest government U-turn, because having pushed a certain form of sexual education in the UK, the government has decided to try to reverse the situation. Perhaps they're trying to reverse their upcoming defeat in the general election, but they have pushed this out this morning, the new relationship sexual health education guidance, what it means for sex education lessons in school. And here is the Secretary of State for Education, Gillian Keegan, tweeting about this. No more situations where parents are prevented from seeing materials. No more teaching children topics way beyond their years. No more teaching the contested view of gender identity. That's what our RSHE guidance will ensure. And she published an article in The Sun, so she went totally highbrow there. And Rishi Sunak also pushing this out. Under no circumstances should parents be blocked from seeing the content taught in their own children's lessons. Well, let's just have a look at the detail of this then. So this is what they're saying. They're going to introduce age limits for the type of material that can be taught to children at certain stages. They're saying the concept of gender identity is highly contested and should not be taught. Is that the case? Well, we'll see in a second. They say that facts about biological sex and gender reassignment will still be taught. Okay, I'm not quite sure how that works. And they say that parents have a legal right to know what their children are being taught. Okay, so then they say that they want to, in light of this new guidance, they want to introduce potentially new RHSE topics, and they're asking for consultation on this. So they might want to talk about suicide prevention in the classes. They might want to talk about sexual harassment and sexual violence. They might want to talk about loneliness, the prevalence of deep fakes. They might want to talk about healthy behaviors during pregnancy as well as miscarriage. They might want to talk about illegal online behaviors, including drug and knife supply, the dangers of vaping, menstrual and gynecological health, including those things that you can see on screen at the moment. But with respect to parental rights, then this is what they say. Parents are not able to veto curriculum content, but they should be able to see what their children are being taught, which gives them the opportunity to raise issues or concerns through the school's own processes if they want to. And they say that parents still have the right to withdraw their child from sex education, but not from the essential content covered in relationships education. So there you go. So whether this is an effort to try to regain some popularity again with many, many people on the conservative side of politics that are perhaps disillusioned with the type of content that's being thrown at their children these days, or whether this is an effort to try to limit the number of people that are pulling their children out of the formal education system altogether and home educating instead, I'm not quite clear. But what I am fairly clear in my own mind about is that it's pretty cynical. Because this government has been behind the direction of education in the schools for the last, since 2010, I guess. So there we go. Now, Ben, let's come back to you then. And of course, one of our favourite people in the world is David Miliband. So what's he been up to?
Yeah, we had a bit of a treat last week, actually, over at Nesta. So two neoliberal princelings in conversation with each other. David Miliband speaking to the Nesta CEO, Ravi Gurumurthy. Nesta, as we know, who owned the Behavioural Insights team, the UK Innovation Lab for Social Good, I think is how they describe it. And David Miliband, obviously former UK Foreign Secretary, former head of the Downing Street Policy Unit under Tony Blair, former Minister for Schools, Secretary of State for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, a real big hitter of the left-wing establishment in this country. But now he's the president and CEO of the International Rescue Committee, which is a New York-based humanitarian, non-governmental organisation, formerly described by Martin Edwards on UK Column as a Trojan horse of the globalists. He's basically being paid nearly £500,000 a year by George Soros, amongst others, in order to basically wash Soros' reputation. Miliband described Soros as having tremendous commitment to the advancement of human rights, social justice, and democracy around the world. Miliband has been gallivanting, so he's based in New York. He's been spending a lot of time in Davos. We talked about this recently. He's been seen at Gold's House, where they promote the Sustainable Development Goals. And he's also a non-exec director at Varian, the big global propaganda and behaviour change consultancy, amongst other things. And it was a fascinating conversation. You can go to the Nesta YouTube channel to watch the whole thing. I'm going to just pull out a few short clips because it just gave some amazing insight into the new Labour project in particular. And these two people were right at the heart of it. But more broadly, the inner workings of the British political machine, especially as it relates to climate change policy, which Miliband and Guru Murthy were intimately involved in developing, as we'll find out now.
You and I were in government in the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs in 2007, and the Prime Minister reshuffled in 2006, and the Prime Minister said, by the end of the summer, I want you to figure out how to get the environmental initiative away from the Tories. And he said that to me, not to you. You were a civil servant, so he wouldn't. I came and then said, and then out of government time, I said, look, I've got this commission from the Prime Minister as the Secretary of State for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs. And we came up with the idea of the Climate Change Act, the Climate Change Committee, carbon budgets, and all the rest of it.
So the Climate Change Act, the Climate Change Committee, carbon budgets, all of that has basically come out of a conversation that these two had. It sounds like an inappropriate conversation as well, by the way, because Miliband, I'm sure you noticed there, did a very good job of backtracking about how appropriate it was for him as a minister to be asking a civil servant to advise him on political policy. Quite interesting. And the systemic impact of this has been absolutely huge, right? I mean, look at the way that climate is dominating the agenda everywhere. This is the biggest industrial transformation of recent history, and it seems like it's an inevitability, right? So Miliband went on to say that in the energy system, the changes won't get rolled back, right? This is a permanent change. Once you've electrified and decarbonised, you're in a whole different ball game on the back of a brief handed by Tony Blair, of all people, the war criminal, to a minister back in 2005, 2006. You know, we're now dealing with the consequences 18 years down the track. And how is all of this going to be facilitated? Through market manipulation and public-private partnerships, as Miliband goes on to describe.
Economic necessity, fiscal necessity means we've got to be obsessive about how well we spend, how well public money is spent. We've got to be obsessive about finding ways of generating investment that don't come off the balance sheet. So the whole, for example, the contract for difference thing, did you invent that in which department was it?
DEC.
In DEC. All sorts of instruments like that, quasi-public-private instruments are going to have to be necessary. But we've got to be obsessive about how well we spend and whether we're spending for activities that are going to generate. I also think this idea of the missions for the country mobilizing activity from outside government is really important on that.
So they're going to cook the books again, basically. So the contracts for difference thing was market manipulation. It's about subsidizing low carbon energy providers. It's been running for a number of years now. And obviously, he talked about public-private partnerships. And those went great, didn't they, for Labour? Let's have a little look. Oh, no, they didn't. It was a fraud. We got about £300 billion worth of bills sent to us for £54 billion worth of services. So basically, we did this public-private partnership. We ended up paying 6 times over the odds. And rather than backtracking and saying this wasn't a good idea, David Miliband and Ravi Guru Murthy are actually going to double down and say we're going to do it again. Craziness, right? And actually, Nesta is still right in the thick of public policy relating to pretty much everything, in particular the energy market. They just issued this today, in fact, I think it was, or certainly this week, basically setting out what they think the next government should do. And they need to be doing that because, as Guru Murthy goes on to point out, the left have got absolutely no ideas about anything at all.
Well, it's interesting what I think about when you talk about project is one, a really interesting diagnosis of how society was changing. So if I think back to Marxism today and how they defined the country and defined the limits of labourism, that was hugely interesting. Secondly, there was this sense that you have to think about the ideas and ideology that relate to those different constituencies and then align a policy prospectus with that diagnosis and with those and with that ideology. It was a thicker prospectus, and a lot of work had been done by people outside of government over many years. And it feels like we don't have that right now. In some ways, we may end up being in a situation where the next Labour government wins without as much ideology or as many ideas as perhaps were around before. I think the other interesting feature, though, is that the ideological debate is richer actually on the right of politics now than on the left. And perhaps that's possibly the winning prospectus for the Labour Party. They're not riven by these difficult ideological debates, whereas the Conservatives are.
So not having any ideas might be a sound electoral strategy, according to Raviguru Murthy. That was quite an amazing thing to hear. Anyway, as an aside, and I do recommend you go and watch the whole thing, it's really fascinating to listen to those two talking. As an aside, after last week's piece that I did on EY, Brian said to me, do you think that the big four firms like EY are working with Nesta, and are they working to get their ideas into the work that they're doing? And I said, I actually don't know. But then this popped up about 2 hours later, and Josie Kluwer, the EY partner who's leading the UK government business at EY and retraining 500,000 civil servants, was at the event. It looks by personal invitation of Raviguru Murthy, so we can say fairly convincingly that these ideas are absolutely going to be pushed through the consulting firms as well as through the political establishment.
Yeah, Ben, brilliant. Thank you. Now, sticking with the whole net zero thing, let's have a laugh at Tony Blair Institute for Global Change and their intervention in UK politics here with a new report entitled Reimagining the UK's Net Zero Strategy. So it's not that interesting, but we'll have a look at what they're saying. First, climate change is a global problem that requires global solutions. The UK is currently responsible for less than 1% of global emissions. Even if the UK is reducing its domestic emissions, there is a significant global emissions challenge that needs to be grappled with. So just think about that. The next time they're telling you to stop eating beef or switch your heating off. But the next thing then is let's look at what they're recommending. So enhancing the UK's net zero legislation for the delivery phase, improving coordination and responsiveness of government delivery. So we're not responding quickly enough. Creating the conditions for transformative climate research and development. They say that they want to see reform of regulatory regimes. They want government funding to be used and regulatory powers to be used strategically to create and shape the markets for clean technologies. So don't leave the markets to do their own thing. We've got to make sure that government is driving the markets in a particular direction. And they want to see increasing UK climate leadership globally. Now, the way that the mainstream media was portraying this today and yesterday was really that this was an intervention which might embarrass Keir Starmer. I don't think so. I think this is getting a clue as to the direction Keir Starmer is going to go after the general election. But anyway, we'll keep an eye on that. Now, moving on then to Ofcom. Now, and the issue of 5G. Now, a number of weeks ago, I was pointing out that the UK still doesn't have any millimetre wave 5G hardware deployed as yet, that the consultation is still going on, and there's going to be an auction going on to decide who and how much they're going to have to pay for licenses to run this type of technology. We've seen it rolled out in the US and in some countries in Europe already, but the UK is well behind the curve on this one. So a new consultation out announced 3 days ago on proposals to make auction regulations for the millimetre wave award. So the process of allocating licenses rolls on, and I just wanted to remind everybody that this process is going on if you want to consider, perhaps making your voice heard on this issue. Now, where does that take us? Yes, speaking of high tech, if you remember the Dragonfire directed energy weapon that the Ministry of Defence has decided to put onto Royal Naval ships and so on. Here's a new one, another directed energy weapon. The UK is going to lead the world in drone killing tech. We're already urgently procuring Dragonfire lasers that can cut down drones at the speed of light. And now we've announced the UK's radio beam weapon that will bring down swarms for just 10p. I mean, what better, value for money could that be? So let's have a look at the wonderful James Cartledge, our Minister for Defence Procurement, as he talks about this.
So I'm here at Thorney Island, where, as you can see, we have this incredible new capability. It's called Radio Frequency Directed Energy Weapon. We've been developing this partnership between DSTL, DNS and the Army, and I'm here to see if we can go further, as we have done with our laser, in bringing this eventually into service with the British Army, and in my view, as soon as possible. I've stressed repeatedly that I want to see a much greater role for our brilliant scientists at DSTL. This is our cutting edge. Technology is how we have competitive advantage against our adversaries. We've got such amazing capacity for that in the UK, throughout defence, but particularly with our scientists. And this is showing how we can actually make a difference, bringing capability forward for the Army and for all of our armed forces.
Now, undoubtedly, you were extremely impressed in the middle of that as the drone fell out of the sky. I'm going to say, I don't believe for 1 second that was the device in operation. That was somebody deliberately crashing a drone. But just to give an impression of James and how great he is, here he is with his joystick in his hand and operating this system, if you can believe it. I don't. Now, I just want to very briefly, before we finish with Ben, I want to very briefly mention the situation in the Southwest with respect to Southwest Water, because many people will know that in the Southwest here we've had an incident of parasitical poisoning, shall we say, and lots of people with severe diarrhea. This is in Brixham, and I believe also in Paynton now as well. Now, the issue here, we'll just bring the Chief Executive on screen there. There she is. She doesn't want to show her face, so we're only seeing her eyes from behind the graphic there. But unfortunately for Southwest Water, they were despicable in the way that they handled this, because people were getting ill, and large numbers of people were getting ill with the most horrendous diarrhea. And Southwest Water initially denied that they were responsible for this, and they said, no, it's not us, Gov. Honest, Gov, it wasn't us. Continue using water as normal. And they, in fact, there was even talk of people being dehydrated as a result of the diarrhea, and so they should drink more water. But Southwest Water denied that they were responsible for it, and then subsequently, a day or two later, were forced to admit that it was them after all, and that people should start boiling their water, and maybe that would be a reasonable thing to do. So we're going to be talking about this in a little bit more in extra, because frankly, Debi has a few things to say, and we're going to let her off the leash completely. And she will be undoubtedly saying things that the Chief Executive of Southwest Water doesn't want to hear. So hopefully you'll join us in extra for that. But Ben, let's end with truth tellers.
Yeah, a bit of light relief here at the end of the show. Truth tellers. We're defending truth. We're seeking it out and we're representing it. And we just happen to work at CNN and the BBC and a whole bunch of other big media organisations. This event happened last week. Actually, in the last couple of days, again on YouTube. Go and watch it. It's fascinating. All these bigwigs. You just saw there briefly Christiane Amanpour from CNN, who apparently has a CBE. I think that's quite a striking thing. I need to look into that. And they run this event every year. It's been going for about 3 years now. The Sir Harry Summit, named for Sir Harry Evans, who was one of the giants of post-war journalism, a newspaper editor at the Times, amongst others. And as we just saw a moment ago, this event is backed by Reuters, the Ford Foundation, BBC Verify, who are really into truth, and our old friends at Tortoise Media, who also this week announced a partnership with the Open Societies Foundation. So this is all about truth, guys. And let's just have a little listen to Krishnan and Guru Murthy talking to Deborah Turness, who is the CEO of BBC News and Current Affairs.
Deborah, one of your big methods, if you like, to bring, or to uphold credibility at the BBC has been showing you're working, the launch of BBC Verify. And you've explained that in terms of, if we show people what we're doing and how we're doing it, then they will believe us more. How's that going? And is there a danger that it's undermined, what all your journalists were doing anyway? You create a Verify unit. What are the rest of them doing?
That's a good question. I'll start with, I think that we're talking about truth here. I don't think it's necessarily truth that's the problem. I mean, truth is there. It's getting hard to find and it's being seriously misrepresented. I think it's trust that is the issue for us. An impartial news organisation that strives to deliver fair reporting and to find, BBC's number one purpose is to pursue the truth with no agenda. So the truth is very much there, alive and kicking. It's finding it is difficult. And then it's convincing people that it is the truth. And that's where trust comes in. And that's where Verify comes in.
Ben, correct me if I'm wrong, but is that the second time I've heard the name Guru Murthy, and they were different people, if I'm right?
That's Krishnan, former Channel 4 news anchor for many years, and then his brother. Yes, as I discovered actually in the Miliband conversation, because David Miliband was talking about being terrified of being interviewed, and he basically says, "Well, my two siblings are news anchors at the BBC, so same family."
Yes. Okay. Well, we'll talk about that and extra as well, I have no doubt. So, but we got to leave it there for today. So I'm going to say thank you very much to Ben. Thank you to Cheryl and to Debbie for joining us today. Thank you all for watching. If you're a UK Column member, do join us for Extra in a couple of minutes. If you're not, you might want to become one so that you can join us for Extra in a couple of minutes. There's plenty of time. But we will see you then. And otherwise, we'll see you on Monday at 1 p.m. as usual. I hope everyone has a great weekend. See you then. Bye-bye.